Hi guys, welcome back to HMA Gallery. Today we are going to be painting watercolor Japanese cherry blossoms. I love Japanese cherry blossoms. They're fun to paint, they're beautiful when we get all done with them, and they're really a very unique flower. Did you know that Japanese cherry blossoms only bloom anywhere from 2 weeks to 1 month out of the entire year? Usually sometime around mid-March to mid-April. And that's crazy to think about. So they have a lot of times special festivals and things going on over in Japan and China and places where these flowers are, because it's such a special thing to see them in bloom. And did you also know that the Japanese cherry blossom is the national flower of Japan? Anyways, we're gonna get started, so come along and paint with me and let's have some fun together. All right, so the first thing that we're gonna have to do is decide where we wanna put the flowers. So I'm gonna make kind of a bouquet, sort of, more like a stem coming up with several flowers on it. So I'm gonna start with my first one somewhere in this region. So I'm gonna get my brush wet, and then I'm going to pick out my fuchsia color. It's kind of like the pinkish purple color. And then you're going to think about one flower petal at a time. So most flowers are going to have either 4 or 5 petals on it. So I'll start the base for my first petal right here. Excuse me. And I'm just going to make a little tiny V like that. And I'm going to wet down my brush, get some water on my bristles, and I'm going to come back and gently touching the edge, I'm going to pull it out and over and back down, and that'll be the shape of my petal. And I'm going to rinse out my brush again, getting just water, pull the water down towards that pink, and then let it work its magic. Just like that. Now I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm going to get more of the fuchsia. Let me show you what color I'm using. So on my palette, I'm using this one. It's next to the white and the dark purple. Then I'm going to get more fuchsia, and I'm going to make another little V, being careful not to touch the petal next to it. Then I'm going to rinse off my brush again, getting just water once again. I'm going to pull it from this side up, curve it a little bit at the top, and pull it back down, touching. And rinse out my brush again, and then pull water down from the edge until it touches that bottom piece, and then let the water do its magic, and it'll pull that color up into the rest of the petal without you having to do anything. We're going to turn the paper again and do the same process. All right, so now what we're gonna have to do is let this dry before we can move on to adding any more detail. But while this is drying, we can add other flowers in other areas on our painting. So now we have to make some decisions here, and I need to decide where I wanna put another flower. And I think I'm gonna put another one directly below it. Remember, this is all gonna attach with a stem in the end. So it might look weird like they're hovering out in space right now, but they won't be that way forever. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same process, starting with my first petal with my bright fuchsia V, and then pulling just water up and around, and then just water down into the petal until it touches where that bright fuchsia was. And then continue the process. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see me do this flower as well. All right, so there's my second flower bloom. Now I'm going to turn it sideways and back out again and decide where I want to put my other one. And I think I'm going to add one more somewhere over here. So once again, the same process, starting with that bright fuchsia. I'm going to make a little bit smaller one this time just to give it a little bit of asymmetry. We don't want everything to be exactly the same. That's what makes things artistically beautiful a lot of times, is when you have some things will be bigger, some will be smaller, some will be in between sizes, and it all comes together beautifully when you do that. All right, so there we have our 3 blooms. So to give it a little bit more variety, I'm going to add a couple of small buds over here. So in order to do a bud, we're going to grab that same fuchsia. We're always working with this one color. That's all we're doing. We don't have multiple colors on this painting. We're just using this one shade of fuchsia to get all of these different shades by pulling the water through and letting it fade. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see my little buds. So I'm going to put one up here. I'm going to have it kind of curve down and over, like so. And I'm going to rinse out my brush, wipe off a little bit of the water. We don't want too much of that water. And then let it continue through like that. And then we're going to do another one over here. I'm going to have it kind of in a U shape. Wipe off some of the water and pull it out just a little further on that one. Like so. Okay, so there are my little buds. And then at the top here, I'm going to put one that's half open. So I'm going to grab my fuchsia, and I'm going to make kind of a sort of straight line that curves up on the edges just slightly. I'm going to rinse out my brush. I'm going to pull through some petals, just curling them around. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, just like that. And then let that fuchsia pull itself up through the water that you just painted on the top in the bow shapes and the arches, just like that. Okay, so this is what we have. Now we have to let it dry for a minute, and then we will come back and we will add the details. All right, so now that they should be dry, we can move on to adding more details. Now, in order to check if something is dry when you're painting with watercolor, use the back of your hand. So I just use the back of my hand and gently pat, because you have natural oils on your fingers and you don't want to mess up your painting. So now I'm going to show you guys the paint palette. So I'm always using Prang 16 count. You can get these at any of your local art shops like Michael's or Joann's, or order them online if you can't have a shop to go to close by. Don't have a shop to go to close by. And then when you open it up, this is the color that we've been using. What we're going to do now is mix 50-50 in this palette. We're going to get some of our fuchsia, and then we're going to get some brown. I'm going to mix it. I'm going to make this deep chocolatey, almost like chocolate covered strawberries is what I think of, or chocolate covered raspberries. So it's 50% brown, 50% fuchsia. And if you want it a little bit darker, just go back and make it a little richer, add a little more color, like so, and that'll make it a little bit darker. Okay, so now that I have my color ready, we're going to come back with our flowers and we're going to add our centers. So all I'm going to do is gently make a circle in the center. Mine isn't quite as dark as I would like it to be, so I am going to add a tiny, tiny, tiny dot of black to my 50-50 brown and fuchsia. You never ever want to overuse black because it'll turn everything black instead of leaving everything just a darker shade, which is what we want. We just want a darker shade. We don't want to cover up everything and get rid of all that pretty color. So I'm going to add in my colors and my centers, just like that. And then I'm going to give it a few minutes to dry. So while that's drying, we can go ahead and paint our stems. So I'm going to add a little more brown to that same color. All I did was added more brown to that pink and brown mixture. Whoops, didn't mean to bump my camera. And we're going to load our bristles carefully, and then we're going to pull up from the bottom of our page. So I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to carefully pull up and stop right here at my first flower. And then I'm going to have it continue to my second flower, and then up through that second flower to where it touches that top flower, just like so. Then load my brush again. I'm going to start back over here, stop right here at this flower, and then I want it to continue up to those little buds. So it'll come up here to this bud, over here to this bud, just like so. All right, so now we have all of our stems connecting everything. And I'm going to use a much skinnier brush for the next part. So I have been using the standard brush that came with my Praying watercolor set, which looks something like this. But now I'm going to switch and use this one that has a much skinnier tip. I'm going to roll it in that brown mixture that I used for the stems. I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to pull a couple little lines out of the bottom of each of my buds, going up into the bud a little tiny bit, like that. And then over here, we're going to do the same thing, just like that. And then up here, we're going to do the same thing. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to pull it down for this one, just like that. Okay, so these went up and these came down. And I'm going to rinse off that little tiny brush. I'm going to let the centers dry before we do the last part. All right, so once the centers are dry, or mostly dry, we're going to use black. So I'm going to get pure black, and we are going to paint in some little stamen. I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to zoom in so you can see. Whoops. And I'm going to just pull out little lines from the center. And they could be random. They don't all have to be the same length. Some can be shorter, some can be longer. Like this, just like that. Then I'm going to take and put little tiny lines on the ends of each one. It almost looks like dots, but they're actually more like little lines. Paint little lines on the ends of each of these, just like so. And there's our first cherry blossom. And then, if you want, you can go back through and very carefully pull a little bit more color into the center of each one, letting a little bit of that black bleed into the center so that it kind of starts to disappear. Just like that. So now we're going to do it to each of our flowers. So go ahead and do the same thing we did on this one with the other two. All right, so now the last thing that we're going to do is add a few stamen coming out of the top of this flower up here. Don't want to forget about that one. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to have a few little lines coming out. Like that. And then I'm going to go back, get a little tiny bit more black on my brush, and then add the tops to each of those, just like that. And that's it. There you have it, your beautiful cherry blossom branch with all your open buds, your closed buds, and your semi-open bud. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you had fun. Check out some of my other videos if you'd like. And also, don't forget to leave me a comment in the comment section below if you have an idea for the next drawing or painting that you'd like me to do. And maybe your video will be the next one that I do. Take care. God bless.